Hello, everybody. We're back again to talk to, this time, Steve Green, who's going to be one of the participants in the round table on Thursday. Steve, I've known for a long time because he used to work with me at the British Council. So welcome, Steve. It's very good to see you again. He's no longer based in the UK. He's actually based in Spain. So he's stayed a true European by heading in that direction. Now, Steve, obviously years of experience in terms of the British Council, being a country director and all those sorts of things. But I particularly wanted to focus today in talking to you on the role that you took up after that, which is when you actually stepped into the space to become responsible for the chair of the EU's selection and monitoring panel for the European Capital of Culture programme, which you were doing all the way through from January 2012 for 5 years. What brought you into that space?
Oh, thank you. I've been working with the European Commission quite closely on a range of projects when I was working for the Council in Slovenia. And increasingly, I was in and out of the relevant department in the European Commission and knew the people there. I knew the people on the Culture Committee of the European Parliament and was working with them on an initial first major report on what the cultural relations of the European Union could be. The lead author was a Dutch member of European Parliament, and she wrote this report. So I was, as it were, well known within the European institutions. And after I left the council, they invited me to join the panel.
And you were there for 5 years, serving as chair for that period.
3 years. I was chair for 3 years.
3 years. Sorry, my apologies. What was the composition of the group like when you were doing it?
It changed quite drastically in the 5 years for one big reason. Halfway through, the European Capital of Culture runs in about a 15-year cycle. And there are new rules and regulations and processes every 15 years. So the first 2 years on the panel were the last 2 years of that cycle, and then there was the new cycle took over. So when I first joined, fellow panel members included Jeremy Isaacs, the head of the Royal Opera House and Channel 4 in the UK television, a former Luxembourg Minister of Culture, a business executive from Austria who had been the finance manager of a European Capital of Culture. And in that first period, there were 7 of us appointed by the European organizations and 6 by the local government in the country that we were looking at. There were 2 cities each year. And the national members, again, were ex-ministers of culture, senior culture managers or retired culture managers. And then in the second period of my time on the committee, there were now 10 members appointed by the European institutions and only 2 by national members. And the 10, we had, again, a wide range. There was never more than 1 from any country. So it was a very international, European panel. We also were very gender equal. And it was good fun. Every 3 years, 3 more people would join. There was a rotation. So you gained experience. Most people did 5 or 6 years. Rather than just 3. So you had a body of experience around the table. So when a candidate came to you, they presented their bid book, which could be up to 80 pages. A very comprehensive bid book. Each candidate is given a questionnaire by the European Commission with about 60 questions. So everybody's bid can be assessed equally. They've all had to answer the same question. And then they turn up in front of the panel and they have normally 30, 45 minutes to convince us why they should be the capital.
Mhm.
And in some cases, like in Italy, we had 21 candidates. In others, like Malta, we just had one. And it's a two-stage. There's a long list from the first round, and then the panel make a short list for the second round, where they have to improve their bid considerably in more detail and take account of the questions that we've posed. You have not covered this very well. It's a good bid, but we don't understand your evaluation system proposal.
Often comments.
Hmm?
Those were often comments, were they?
Oh, everybody, yes. Nobody got through the first round by saying, this is good enough to win, don't bother for the second round. The panel were, we had a reputation, and the current panel has the same reputation of not taking hostages. It was always asking for something more than what you were giving. And there can never be a perfect bid, because it's always competition against the other cities. So although there are 6 fixed criteria split into about 20 sub-criteria, so the panel could say, oh, look, on criteria, for example, outreach, you're not actually doing much with schools, with youth clubs, with the religious communities. You're not going beyond the usual suspects who turn up to arts events. Because in the early days, in the 1980s and 1990s, most of the European capital of culture just appealed to the people who went to arts events, which tended to be educated graduates with money.
And when did that change start to happen? And what drove that change?
It started, Glasgow, for example, and a colleague from Glasgow made, so Glasgow introduced going to the streets. The real big change of Glasgow during the year was going into the streets and having far more open access events and engagement. It already had built over the previous few years its new museums and its new galleries, etc. But the year that came changed. During the 90s, then you had Dublin used it to help regenerate a rather rundown area of central Dublin, which became a creative area, and now it's a tourist trap. So 20 years on, life changes, as indeed all of them do.
Yeah, and that's certainly, I think, also part of the story of the creative economy, that when it's deployed in cities, you find that actually it's often used as a tool in regeneration, and very successfully so, and also in terms of its relationship to tourism. Now, the EU program started in the mid-80s. It was then followed in about the mid-90s, in the mid-noughties, by the UNESCO Creative Cities program. In what ways do you perceive the systems to be different?
The UNESCO one has far more cities for a start. I don't know what the current number is, but it must be measured in the hundreds in the different, again, how many individual strands from dance, folk arts, architecture, literature, etc. So it's very sector-based, which gives it a very clear focus. And if you look at some of the evaluation reports on the UNESCO site, you can see, I was looking at, for example, Ljubljana, city I know well, is a city of literature in the UNESCO sense. And you can see within that framework of working within the literature, publishing, reading world, it has a very clear focus of what it's trying to do. The European Capital of Culture now, the first criteria that you have to meet is, where is your current city's cultural strategy? And that encompasses as much as you want to cover. But it's the first requirement is have in the last basically year, your city produced a comprehensive 5, 6, 7-year cultural strategy with funding, outcomes, etc. The Capital of Culture program is only a small part of that, because a lot of what can happen in the entire culture world, like subsidy for businesses of different types, of new cultural buildings of different types, they happen concurrently but outside the European Capital of Culture, because they have different management streams, often different funding streams. So the way I would look at it is that on the one hand, the European Capital of Culture program is more holistic. The UNESCO programs are what's the word, focused and direct on particular areas.
Yeah, and of course, the UNESCO program is a title which a city gets not just for a year, but for a longer period, effectively. I'm just wondering, do you think that there are issues there as far as either program is concerned around that question of legacy, or in terms of longevity? You know, how do you sustain something over a period of time?
If I have a Google alert for European Capital of Culture, and I have it in several languages. And cities who were European capitals of culture in the early 1990s are still recorded in the media, international media and national media, as a European capital of culture.
Yeah.
Even if we know that some of the programs that they actually delivered in that year, 15, 20 years ago, were not very good. Nowadays, they are still recorded. There is a brand legacy which a city exploits, and is always going to be referred to it. We tell newly selected cities that you're now going to be stuck with this title, Madam Mayor, for the next 30 years. And anything that you do, not just in culture, but it could be something, a corruption scandal. It could be a new motorway. It's got nothing to do with the European capitals of culture, but that's what your city is going to be known as. So there is a name recognition that goes with the one. Legacy, most of the evaluations of European capitals of culture have shown very common things. A boom in tourism and visits and recognition during the year, a drop off the year after, and if your city has what tourists want to see, then a slow increase of tourism. Within the city, the change tends to be, and it follows the same with the Olympics and other mega events, from selection to delivery to legacy, is that euphoria when you're selected. During the build-up, intense criticism and dismay. How much is it costing? Oh, nothing's happening. Oh, look, everyone's getting paid too much. Delivery, bloody marvelous, isn't it? Absolutely superb. Year after, wow, we did it last year, great. 3 years later, so what? Mm-hmm. Because, in essence, the funding sources change. There's a big build-up of funding and the media interest, etc., towards the event. But that's never going to be maintained forever. So, London Olympics 2012, sport for all, there's going to be a massive increase in people participating in sporting activities. Well, not if the government cuts the money going into children's schools, colleges, local authorities' activities. Change of government, change of priorities. Mm. So I can recall there was something that a few years ago that the then head of culture in Glasgow said, oh, we were capital of culture, European capital of culture 30 years ago, but that's run out of steam. We've got to reinvent and redo what we're doing. Same within Liverpool. The most successful ones, and I think it goes to the UNESCO titles as well, are where you have the city administration at the mayor's level and at senior civil servant level know that the culture and creative world is good for their city.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how they interpret that is, there's lots of reasons, but they know it's good and therefore it should be supported. And again, there are many ways they can support. What they need to do is to have a department of culture or a unit supported by the city, which is determined to keep on the pressure, not just in publicity, but talking to the cultural world, bringing institutions together and keeping the momentum going forever. And that's been Liverpool's success, is that they've continued that support. Lille in France is another one that has kept a long-term commitment. Others, basically, they finished the year, closed the shop up, and that was it.
Mm. And so the opportunity is lost effectively then.
Yeah,
and that must be true therefore as far as the UNESCO cities creative cities is concerned, that you may bid for it, but it's actually what you do when you've been successful with the bid and how you maintain that momentum around it.
It is, and I think that a UNESCO creative city has to do a monitoring report every 4 years,
mm-hmm.
which goes public. Now, how much it goes public in the city is a good question. How much the local media pick up that report and challenge it or celebrate it is a key question. Or is it just a document which is sent behind the scenes to UNESCO, hidden away on a UNESCO website? So yes, it's public, but does anybody actually do anything about it? Yeah. So, you know, the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity has a similar sort of monitoring program, but it's within a very narrow, albeit global, small community of people who are actually aware of it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's civil servant writing to civil servant, talking to NGOs who work with civil servants, and that's it.
And that is the question with data always, isn't it? In terms of the evidence you have, it's all very well and good collecting it, but it does need to be interrogated. It needs to be considered, and it needs to be used again to kind of take what you're doing forward in different ways.
Yeah, most of the evaluations of European Capital of Culture have been principally statistical reports.
Yeah.
How many events, how many people turned up, who knew about it in the city, how many tourists, and it's statistics. Now, that pleases a simple approach of the public administration. The mayor can stand up and she can say, oh, look, 200,000 people came to our events or whatever. Very few of the evaluations go back to the objectives that were set at the start and tick them off and say, well, your objective when you bid for the unit for the title was X. You surpassed it. You didn't measure it at all. You forgot about it. Or you partially met it and the reasons why, etc. There's very little what I would consider managerial evaluation rather than public relations evaluation.
We'll have to end it there, Steve, but thank you very much for that. I'm sure there is a lot that's going to stem from your comments now that will kind of play in people's minds in terms of the sorts of issues they want to discuss on Thursday. But thank you very much indeed, and we will see you on Thursday.
Indeed. Before you go, am I that red on your screen?
You probably are, yes.
Yeah. I was out in the sun yesterday.
At least you've got some sunshine. Look at me, I'm very pale.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Good to